numbers, and that goes for poetry as well. As you remember, we took some poem breaks, not necessarily just music breaks, so we're happy to do that, and you can send those to Juliana at WBAI.org. Don't give my email out to anyone else, okay, unless you're listening. It's Juliana at WBAI.org, and Juliana will respond to you in 3 business days. No, Juliana, that would be great to have you. I would love that. Again, we used to do that on the Julianna Forlano show, and now we're happy to do that here again. So yesterday we began our conversation about how capitalism plays a role in social isolation. With Harriet Fraad, we were talking with her. Today we continue that conversation with our regular guest, Professor Richard Wolff. In the wake of the horrific shootings inflicted on our communities, we're looking at what causes a person living in one of the wealthiest countries in the world to take such drastic and destructive measures. We saw in the El Paso shooters screed. We're not calling it a manifesto here because the word manifesto has connections to...
It has leftist implications. Thank you, caller, yesterday for pointing that out.
Yes, an alarming sense of, in that rant, he showed an alarming sense of isolation that we're going to be digging into today with Professor Wolff. Dr. Wolff is a Marxian economist, professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, but he is today best known as the host of Economic Update with Richard D. Wolff on Fridays here at 6:30 p.m. on WBAI and syndicated in over 70 radio stations and on Free Speech TV and on YouTube and all over the place. Dr. Wolff, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Juliana. Glad to be here.
So did you have a chance or an opportunity to read the rant that the El Paso shooter? Yeah. So what do you make of all of his mixed messaging around both capitalism, isolationism, and this blaming of immigrants for what's gone wrong with capitalism?
Well, it struck me that this was a young person of considerable intelligence. He had thought about a lot of issues. He had tried to put them together. He had produced a document of several paragraphs that did a perfectly reasonable job of, expressing his thoughts. But the thoughts that he expressed are not only confused, but they are, at least for me, a kind of synopsis or summary of the kinds of confusions crisscrossing American culture right now. On the one hand, he understood that there's an ecological crisis. He accepted that. He understood that. He also understood that big corporations are a burden in this society, a lot more than they are a blessing. But he also, at the same time, didn't know what to do with his awareness and sensitivity to the social problems, and so he could be shaped in a way to end up with a bizarre conclusion that the ecological dangers and the dangers of our economic system could somehow be managed or dealt with by getting rid of Latino immigrants, which is one of the greatest non sequiturs, I could have ever imagined. But it's a testimony, if your newscast, if your mainstream media are endlessly focusing people's attention on something which may or may not be real. For example, the invasion of people from Latin America. There is no invasion. But if you say it often enough, and if you stage nice dramatic actions, let me give you an example. Last week, the same time as this horrible shooting in El Paso, the United States government decided to round up, to mass arrest 700 people in Mississippi working in 7 poultry processing factories. Now, if you believe, let's take the government at its word, that the people involved there are quote-unquote undocumented or illegal immigrants, the perfectly reasonable way to deal with this is to issue each of these persons a ticket, more or less like you do for someone who violates a traffic law, specifying you must show up in court on such and such a day, and you must have documentation because we have reason to believe, etc., etc. That would allow each of these people to make adjustments in their lives, take a day off from work, make arrangements for their innocent children to be cared for, and you could get the job done. Not to do that, to make a big theatrical activity of men in uniforms rounding up people who therefore lose their day of work without preparation, whose children are distraught because the parents don't come home, with all that we know that's not done for law enforcement. That's done for terrorizing a population and for PR. And it leads young men like that to feel as though they're somehow part of a legitimate solution to the problems of the United States by this wild behavior out of all proportion, out of all need.
And it doesn't even do what they were trying to do. I mean, it was just a random act with random victims. You know, this is crazy. I want to go back to something that you just mentioned, his inability to know what to do in those moments. There are people on the internet telling young men, mostly men, pretty much all men, exactly what to do, which is take a gun and go out there and, you know, do like your hero did. And they raise up these other folks as heroes who have committed these atrocities. One thing that was striking me when you spoke was the disbelief in the political system that has been brought by, you know, for decades. There's reason to disbelieve in the political system, real reasons to disbelieve in it, depending on which group you're from. But the right wing has used that disbelief in the political system to disenfranchise people and make them feel like they are unable to do anything. I mean, this guy could have joined the Sierra Club and been out trying to protect those butterflies or whatever. Exactly. He could have done any number of things that drowned the government in a bathtub rhetoric, that government is the problem and it doesn't solve the problem, that goes back to Reagan. Can you talk a little bit about the disbelief in the political system and how that plays a role here?
Yes, it's been conservatives have always been afraid of the government and of the people. Look, if the government is going to be the representative of the people as a whole, of the majority, as in our democratic creed, then we have a problem for capitalists because they are a minority. The people who employ us, the employer, the owner of the business, the board of directors, you add them all up, and it's a very small fraction. I would say 2% would be a large guess of our population. The other 98% are employees, people who work for a living for the employers. It doesn't take rocket science to understand that the mass of people, since they're the majority, and in a society where the majority, at least theoretically, is supposed to govern what the government does, the capitalists always have to worry that the majority who aren't capitalists will use their political power, controlling the government because they're the majority, to undo the inequalities of capitalism. So that's what they're worried about. So they have to always diminish the government, throw the government under the bus, limit the amount of money that the government gets so it can't do the things they're so terrified it would do because of its dependence in a system of universal suffrage on the votes of people. So they've always done this.
Let me jump in and ask you something here, because you've kind of talked now about the psychological effects. You've talked about the political causes and effects. I'd like to focus in on the economic part of this.
Good.
Can you talk about, you may or may not have studied how many of these shooters have been economically well off, or whether they've been underpaid, underemployed, if you know that? And secondly, what role does that play in the problem, and therefore what role should it play in the solution to these mass shootings?
Good. The basic answer to your question is that two phenomena are cited most often as the trigger that sets these people off. Now, obviously, it's not this thing alone. It's a whole history of their lives to that point. But here are the two. Number one, that someone they're close to, a lover, a spouse, a companion, leaves them, that they are suddenly confronted with a level of loneliness they literally cannot bear, or they lose their job, or they lose a promotion, or they lose an opportunity for advancement that they believed they were entitled to or deserved, and they literally can't handle either of those crises in their lives, and then make some kind of strange turn in which they are going to go out in a blaze, literally, of glory, at least for them. And in a sense, they do want to end their lives, which is why so often they undertake an action where the police or someone else is going to think seriously about ending their lives, since they're ending other people's, and they waltz themselves into that because they are so distraught. If we had a society that in a serious way dealt with this question, and it's a really good question that you asked, we would have two things: a really well-equipped, well-funded program to help people with emotional crises. We don't have that in our society. We barely can take care of people's physical illnesses, and we don't do a good job of that in terms of mass insurance. And the other thing would be, which is long overdue, to give people a guaranteed job,
yes,
and a guaranteed income. We're rich enough to do it. We could do it. And it would take the enormous uncertainty, the enormous anxiety that people have about jobs and incomes, and take that away. It's a basic understanding that we invented housing so we wouldn't be at the mercy of the rains and the snows and the storms. We ought to invent a secure job for everybody, because it also takes away our vulnerability when we don't need to be vulnerable. And for those amongst us with troubles, that vulnerability can produce disasters like El Paso.
And getting away from the specifics of mass shootings, what are other mechanisms of capitalism that feed into social isolation, and how can we deal with those?
Well, I mean, again, let me play with the unemployment. In our society, something is very weird. Think about it in a new way, perhaps. When an employer makes a decision that for the profit of his or her business, they don't need, let's say, John and Mary. And so they go to John and Mary, who are employees, and they say, it's Friday afternoon, here's your check, don't come back Monday, we don't need you anymore. Let's assume that that's a reasonable decision based on whatever the reality for that business is. So the employer takes what's a step that's good for him as an employer to lay off these people. In our society, that's the end of the story. For that person, for Mary, for John, whoever's involved, they're now abandoned. They are left. They are rejected. They are told they are unwanted. And nobody steps in. We don't have any institution that says, wait a minute, you are a valuable person. You are an important person. You have done good work. You're honest. You have a family that depends on you. And we are going to now work with you to find another kind of way for you to have a job, have an income, and make a useful contribution to society. If we were a society that had anything like the compassion for one another that we celebrate in the abstract or in the church on Sunday, we would have established institutions like this long ago. But when we don't, we convey to the people, you're not wanted, you're not cared for, no one is going to care for you. And if you want to build in people a sense of isolation and bitterness, that's a sure way to do it.
Well, I appreciate the work that you do on Economic Update and the work that Harriet also does as part of your network, the Democracy at Work network. She does the show she was on yesterday called Capitalism Hits Home, because you are, there's a hope that perhaps you or her work or the work that's done here on WBAI will get to them before 8chan does. Because what you do is you explain things in terms that make people go, aha, it's not my fault. Oh, and we always do here is we try to give, and I'll be doing this at the end of the show, something people can do where there'll be other like-minded people where they don't have to just sit home, hear the news, and be isolated. So I thank you for that work that you do. I did want to get your comment here as we round down to the bottom of our segment. The Trump administration announced that it's going to change the way the Endangered Species Act is applied. We talked about this at the beginning of the show. It's weakening it. And basically the new rules let the regulators for the EPA, which, as we all know, is not for protecting the environment anymore, they're going to be allowed to conduct economic assessments. And that economic assessment is going to factor into whether an animal goes on the endangered species list. It's not just whether it's literally endangered. It's, is it endangered, and does it get in the way of oil and gas drilling? I'd like to get your comment on that, please. And I know we're just springing this on you at the last second.
Not at all. Look, it's a side business for economists. If you're an economics professor, and I speak from personal experience here, if you're an economics professor, you make a decent living, but you're never going to get rich. One of the ways economics professors try to deal with that problem is offering their services to make estimates of the very kinds you just speak to. Let me give you an example. A company produces a product, and it turns out that the product makes people sick, and so there's a lawsuit. The people get sick, sue the company for producing an inappropriate product, etc. Okay, here's what happens. The lawyers on one side get a bunch of economists to make estimates about how bad the damage was, how many days were lost by the workers, how much income, how much penalty should be, and the company hires its lawyers, who in turn hire their economists to make the same estimates. Here comes the big no surprise. The economists for one side come up with very different estimates than the economists for the other. The economists working for the company say the losses to the individuals were small. The economists working for the individuals say the losses were large. Who wins the case depends on who has more money to hire more economists with more credentials to impress a jury or a judge. This has nothing to do with justice. It has everything to do with who has the deeper pockets. And you're going to see exactly the same thing. An EPA that doesn't really want to protect the environment is going to use limited funds, hire limited lawyers. Meanwhile, the Koch brothers or others like that are polluting this world have billions at their disposal, hire the best lawyers, who hire an army of economists, including people like me, to make the estimates that will then, quote unquote, persuade a jury, persuade an administrator, and most of all, persuade the public.
Did they hire you specifically? I'm hoping for a Sanders or Warren win, and then you getting a job in the administration of the next president.
They did come to me a few times, but I understood, of course, why they were coming to me. It wasn't because of the estimates they wanted me to do. That would be simple and straightforward. The reality is, because I went to Harvard and Yale, they knew that by parading my credentials in front of any jury or judge, they would get further what they want at the expense of the economists that the other side got, who lacked or had lesser credentials in the eyes of the jury. This is all manipulation and has nothing to do with the justice of what's going on.
We're speaking with Professor Richard Wolff, host of Economic Update here on WBAI at 6:30 on Fridays. Professor Wolff, thanks for being with us on the show again. I appreciate it. Oh, can I ask you one last question? We have our new, this is sort of just for fun times, but we have our brand new, my old sound effects board from when I was doing the show at 6 o'clock. You may remember we had a good time with those back then. And we have two little sound effects.
Fascism
and
plutocracy.
Fascism and plutocracy. Which one are we closer to?
Well, that's a tough one. Those things often go together, and I think, we're watching the United States try to cope with the crash of capitalism in the aftermath of 2008, doing a very bad job as people discover that, yes, we have low unemployment, but the quality of the jobs we have and the quality of the income we have and the inequality that we suffer in this society are all getting worse. And to keep a lid on a society that's disintegrating is often what plutocracies and fascisms try to do. And I think you're seeing in everything that the Trump administration does, the arrival in power of the extreme right wing, which is just simply doing its usual agenda, destroying the environment, pushing white supremacy. I mean, it's a catalog of horrors of those people who think they can keep the lid on society by finding scapegoats and repressing them with all the energy they can muster. This story always ends badly.
So, Professor Wolff, your answer was, but it makes us feel...
Exactly.
Hey, thank you so much for joining us on the program. I really appreciate it. We look forward to having you on. Next time, you're speaking with Dr. Richard Wolff. Don't forget to check out his show, Economic Update, wherever good, interesting shows are, including here on WBAI, 6:30 p.m. on Fridays. Thanks, Professor Wolff.
Thank you, Juliana. Look forward to next time.
You're listening to WBAI, Waking Up with Juliana and King.
Good morning.
Yeah, it's going to rain this afternoon. Big thunderstorms are expected starting around 12:30, depending on which part of the listenership area you are listening from. And they're going to roll through until, at least evening. So be ready for that evening commute. Don't promise anyone you're going to be anywhere on time because, a little bit of rain in New Jersey. That's it. Oh, we have a big story of something that's happening in Newark. The lead... Did you read about this? Newark, do you know about this? You can call in if you want and tell the people to 212-209-2877. But it's making national news now because Newark is starting to have shades of what happened in Flint. Everyone who's living in Newark knows that the government gave out filters because many Newark residents' water goes through lead pipes before it gets into their homes. So they gave out filters. And now guess what, people? Those filters, as I imagine you already knew, they don't do the job. So they're telling people in Newark to get bottled water. We're going to take our quick break here, and we'll bring you more on that after. And also what's happening with Bernie Sanders. Everyone's saying... The media seems to be saying that he's not a contender anymore, even though he's the number 2 contender. Perhaps number 3, depending on the polls. But second only to Elizabeth Warren and Biden. But, what is that? Why are they doing that? Let's continue our discussion. You're listening to Waking Up. We'll have a musical break, and then we'll be right back. check this out. By the way, our listener call-in line is open, 212-209-2877. And what the New York Times is calling an echo of Flint, and hey, I just said that too, New Jersey city that's handed out nearly 40,000 filters to help protect residents whose water flows through old lead pipes, like I just said before this break, and now saying those filters might not be working, is moving to a plan B. Starting at 3 p.m. yesterday, those in Newark who got one of those filters and whose water is piped from the Pequannock water treatment plant can pick up your bottled water at 4 locations around the city. You can go to newjersey.com for specifics on that. Following a letter Friday from the Environmental Protection Agency, the data suggests that use of the specific filtration devices distributed by Newark may not be reliably effective at keeping lead out of the water. That was after a second round of water sampling from 2 Newark residences. We believe it is the responsibility of the city of Newark to provide bottled water as soon as possible. That's from the EPA. Lead started seeping into the water there in 2017 when those old pipes began corroding and the water treatment system faltered. Newark officials, of course, have initially denied any problem with the city's drinking water until last fall when it suddenly started giving out those filters. On Saturday, the mayor of Newark shared results of the recent test, but he urged only households with pregnant women and young children to seek out the bottled water, telling everyone else that I guess it's just fine to drink lead. Hello? No. He told everyone else to flush the water for 5 minutes before using the filters. In January, that same mayor implored President Trump in an open letter to help Newark's true emergency instead of building a border wall. It's still not clear why the filters in the 2 tested homes, which showed lead levels above the federal cap of 15 parts per billion, failed to work properly. The city is planning further tests, but by the way, just be careful there. Okay, we have callers calling in. Our phone lines are open, 212-209-2877. Remember, callers, try to make your point because now we have 6 lines lighting up and we want to get you in here. Caller, your name and where are you calling from?
Hi, it's Rose. I'm way out in New Jersey.
Hi, Rose.
I just want to say something. You know, a number of years ago, American Water tried to buy that Pequannock Reservoir, and the people of Newark said, no, we're not giving you our water. The question is it safer to drink lead, or is it safer now to drink things like Poland Spring, which are full of double the amount of fluoride, which destroys your pineal gland and mucks up your health.
Pineal gland. Yeah, that's right. Right. Pineal gland, we definitely need to keep that in order.
Yeah. Well, you know what's interesting? I think it's sort of part of the same thing that you talk about the shootings in El Paso, why they went after the grannies. Well, we put all the money into the fund that both Grover Norquist and the Koch brothers and their aide James Buchanan of James Mason University. They're now trying their doggondest to get us to give over the Social Security. And if you've put in a lot of years, they want to harvest that. And they got their whole they're making a big deal about it in the media because the media wants to keep the young slave class but get rid of the ones who've paid in.
That's a great point, Rose. I appreciate that. I think probably the shooter in El Paso was just plain ignorant. It seemed like, I don't know if he went in there targeting actually older adults, but the media certainly doesn't report in any way how important it is when we lose the wisdom of our elders. I
got a very important point to make to you.
Go ahead.
One of the schools that Donald Trump went to didn't give him a map. Because if you look at old maps, you'll see that half of California, all of Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, were all part of Mexico.
Right.
And then we made some kind of deal, or just took it, just to be nice. And
you said, deal was not what it was. Let's say, sure, invasion. We did the invading.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Hey, Rose, thanks for the call. I appreciate that. And I appreciate you pointing out that let's call it a hypocrisy. 212-209-2877 is our phone line. Caller, you are on the air. Your name and where you're calling from.
Mary, Union County, New Jersey.
Hi, Mary. Go ahead.
Excuse me, how are you?
Yeah, good. It's going to rain out there today, so be careful. What would you like to say?
Oh, well, they're talking about the water in Newark. Is that right?
Yes.
I'd just like to comment.
Yes, please.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mary. Are you there?
Yeah, well, what, am I on the air
Oh,
now?
you're on the air, girl. Yeah. Yes, you are on the air. Go ahead and make your comment.
Oh, well, what I wanted to say, if I'm on the air right now,
Yeah, no swearing if you're
Newark
on the air.
compared to Newark, excuse me?
No swearing. I'm just kidding with you. Go ahead, Mary.
Newark compared to Flint. Flint was a deliberate thing. This was happening in Newark with their water. They have old pipes, which need to be changed, but it wasn't a deliberate thing. Flint was deliberate to people that were poor.
Well, I think they just ignored it. They knew the pipes needed to be changed, and instead of changing the pipes, they decided to give out filters that didn't work. So, yeah, that's a good point. They just ignored the facts.
And I also just wanted to add that the Natural Resources Defense Council had raised this issue and the city hadn't taken action, and then they ended up filing suit on June 26th. So there are some similarities in terms of inaction. But
The big similarity is lead is getting into people's drinking waters, and it seems like the people in power are not taking the appropriate action. Thanks for your call, Mary. I appreciate it. Caller, you are on the air. Your name and where you're calling from. Hi, are you there? Hello, hello, hello. I do not hear you. Hi, caller. Your name and where you're calling from. You're on the air.
Yeah, my name is Mark Albertson from Norwalk, Connecticut. I called you some time back, if you remember, on World War I, Edward Bernays.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call.
You're welcome. Dr. Wolfe was on this morning, and I listened to him. And you asked the question prior to his hanging up about whether we are closer to fascism.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. America right now is a corporate state.
That would be
plutocracy.
Yes. Crypto. There are more choices. We were just kind of playing around, but corporate fascism seems like where we're at.
Well, yeah, especially if you read the 1927 charter by Mussolini for the worker. In other words, where the big corporations and big financial institutions run the economy, and the worker is second.
Mm.
The worker, the liberty of the individual exists for the liberty of the state.
Mm.
And that's where you're going right now. So actually, the corporate coup is over with. We are a corporate state, but the rightist revolution continues. And you mentioned it earlier yourself, Juliana, when you were talking about how the EPA is going to choose, per economic justifications, which animals are going to survive and which animals will not.
So, Mark, as a student of history, as you obviously are well informed around our history around these matters, can you tell us where we are going? What does the cliff look like?
Well, right now, in fact, you want to know where you're going, all you have to do is take a look at the November 2016 election. We had 231 million.
I like to call it a selection because it wasn't really an election.
Well, to me, it was a plebiscite. That's exactly what it was.
Oh, that's well
but
said.
if you take a look, you had 231 million and change Americans eligible to vote. 136,700,000 and change showed up. Out of that 136,700,000 and change, 128 million and change voted for one of two candidates, Clinton or Trump. So that's 94.4% of those who voted opted to vote for one of two candidates who had or have no intention of abiding by your Constitution and Bill of Rights. And
you
so
said
it's
it.
the American public who has to share culpability for the situation it's in.
That's well said, Mark. I appreciate your calls. I always appreciate you calling in, and thanks for listening. I appreciate it. Caller, not caller. I forgot, because I'm so excited about taking calls, that we have Jack Devine from Revolutions Per Minute on the show. Jack, hi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me again.
Do you get up this early regularly, or are you doing us a favor?
It depends on the day.
Well, I appreciate you being here. Your show, Revolutions Per Minute, is on at 5 p.m. Can you tell the listeners what's coming up today?
So today we're going to be talking with members of Democratic Socialist Immigrant Justice Working Group. So we're going to be talking about both we're going to be discussing open borders, what that means as a concept, the history of how borders emerged within the nation state as a means of kind of upholding the domination of a particular class, and then kind of discuss the actions that are going on against people who are organizing against ICE right now in the concentration camps. And then we're going to be kind of discussing the broader horizon, the short-term struggles for demilitarization and the long-term horizon of open borders.
Obviously, a very, very important conversation. I look forward to tuning in myself. Revolutions Per Minute. Jack Devine's there, 5 p.m. here on WBAI. Jack, I can't wait. Is your show? I need your show to deal with this environmental crisis that the president is now rolling back the Endangered Species Act. Can you do that next week? Can you do that next week?
It's horrifying to hear. We are definitely organizing. We're organizing on that front, and we're covering extensively both the climate crisis as well as the eco-socialist organizing that's going on.
Fabulous. I love the name of your show, Revolutions Per Minute. Again, it's on at 5 p.m. We're speaking with Jack Devine. Thanks again. Don't forget to listen to that show today here on WBAI or WBAI.org. Our phone lines are still open, 212-209-2877. If you want to continue the conversations we've been having. We've been talking about Newark's water. We talked about isolation under capitalism. That's why I like community radio. It's supposed to be community-oriented. And we have a lot of communities that we serve.
Broad-based, definitely.
You can get your white friend here, or your black friend.
your only white friend or
your
black
one
friend.
white friend. I want to have a segment called My... Better not. I'm afraid we're going to get in trouble over here. 212-209-2877. By the way, we're going to talk hopefully tomorrow about... what's happening with the Bernie Sanders campaign? Are you guys still feeling the burn?
Feel the burn.
Remember this?
When you give tax breaks to billionaires and refuse to raise the minimum wage, that's extremism.
Feel the burn.
When you deny the right of workers to come together in collective bargaining, that's extremism.
Feel the burn.
When you tell a woman that she cannot control her own body, that's extremism.
That's right. That's what I'm talking about. I think Feel the Burn needs to be resurrected because people are still feeling the burn. But, of course, there's a narrative emerging in the media around, they're saying, oh, Bernie's losing steam. He's losing momentum. I think that anyone who is supporting Elizabeth Warren also reflects that Bernie is not losing steam because the closest person to Bernie ideologically is Elizabeth Warren. 212-209-2877. And I think the media is doing its normal job saying that they are just basically doing a Bernie write-off. There's a direct correlation between the media coverage of the polls and Bernie Sanders standing in those polls. By the way, polls are one thing, but the energy that's on the ground for Bernie, as Nina Turner has said, she's one of the co-chairs for Sanders' campaign, is very, very important. And I'm seeing him online at places that, aren't MSNBC, but places that will engage his voters. He would just spend an hour on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is enormous. Caller, you are on the air. Your name and where you're calling from.
Hi, it's Russ in White Plains again.
Oh, hi.
Hi, I'd like to give you that citation you asked for. If you Google Vicky Ward, Chris Matthews, the transcript of July 7th, 2019, and 1/5 of the way down, it says Acosta was told at the one meeting he had about Epstein that it was above his pay grade, that he's an intelligence asset. Now, I think King will look that up because he's a good lawyer. But one thing, I have a bone to pick with you folks down there. You hung up on me. You said I hung up, and I really resent that. And it's going to be the last call you get
Wait,
from me.
no, don't leave us. No, Russell.
I have a problem.
Wait.
You have a lot of intellectual curiosity, Juliana.
Thank you.
But when you bring a lawyer on who demands evidence, he's not a reporter. It's a jigsaw puzzle. You
Russell,
take the pieces
wait. Let me
look at them.
Don't leave. I want to tell you what happened.
Well, this is my last call, so
I hear you, but just listen to me, and I understand if this is your last call, and I'm sorry to lose you
no
because
problem. But when
wait,
you lie
let me tell
on
you.
a caller,
Let me
when
tell
you lie, about me hanging up.
No, Russell, let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what happened, because we heard a click in our headphones. And we thought, if you listen back to the show, I'm like, did he go? Didn't he? Did he? And then I wasn't sure. And that's why I addressed you.
You don't have to apologize.
After.
I was on the other line.
But I am.
He hung up on me. And then lied about it and repeated the lie today. That's why I know. He knows what's going on. Listen, you should dump King. You are better off on your own. Goodbye.
Well, thanks for calling, but I do feel sad that you're not going to call back. And I do appreciate the fact that you called back with the citation. I'm sure King will look it up. Russell, my man. Oh, I hate losing callers. I hate losing callers, especially callers who, call with interesting points that we should look more into. Anyway, how do we end the show? So sad. How about this?
I know everybody's awake now, that's for sure.
Kids are crying. Yeah. Well, anyway, you're listening to Waking Up. I'm Julianna Forlano. I'll be back tomorrow morning. As will King.
I hope.
And hopefully Russell will call us back. I'm sorry that happened, and I didn't think you hung up. I
heard a click.
We did hear a click. I'm not going to lie.
Click.
There was a click, but the click could have been any number of things. You should see the chords we have in here. Anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Stay dry out there. We'll see you tomorrow.
Like many of you, like many Americans, I have felt frustrated and betrayed by the